We continue our fall camp report series now with the Houston Cougars and my longtime friend, Rob Sellers, publisher. Good to see you, my fellow bald, glorious human being.
Good to see you too, Tim. I'm sorry I missed you in Vegas this year.
Yeah, I was out there in my little corner doing my little work and not paying attention to anyone else. I didn't even get up for Dion. That's
pleasurable. You know what I mean? That sounds delightful. The older you get, the more you want to be by yourself and just work, right?
Yeah, they just put us at a far table and we did videos and had a good time and existed in our own place. And Houston's in an interesting place as they start a rebuild under a incredible coach, Willie Fritz. Everyone from Kansas or Kansas State are quite familiar with him, being Michael Bishop's former quarterback coach that helped that quarterback move on to Kansas State. And he's won literally everywhere he's gone, including winning at Tulane, which is never easy to do. And now he's at Houston. And it's a big effort here to pick up the pieces after Dana Holgorsen. Best of luck to Willie Fritz. I don't think it'll happen in 1 year, but you just never know. He's that good. Give me the overview of where this team is at right now in the fall camp.
So they're doing well. They had their first scrimmage last Saturday, and then they have another scrimmage coming up this Saturday as well. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but that'll be the 17th. So that'll be their probably last scrimmage. They play UNLV on the 31st. They play week 0, I guess, this year. So they're doing well. I mean, camp's gone well. A lot of the major spots that we were looking at for position battles, specifically along the offensive line, have really turned into not necessarily as much position battles. A lot of the incumbents, so to speak, that were, they brought in some guys from the portal to try to push, and see if they could find somebody to replace anybody that was already there. And thus far, they've tinkered a bit with the tackles, but for sure the middle of the line stayed the same. And the tackles, for the most part, the incumbents have just stayed with the first team. So it doesn't appear right now that they're going to have any changes. Those that took every snap in the spring, we weren't sure coming out of the spring if that was just because they were the incumbents, so they put them in type deal, and then we'll get into camp and actually get the battle going, so to speak. But they've tinkered switching out the seconds with the first team tackles, but they keep coming back anytime they're running anything significant in camp. It's been the same offensive line, which is probably good that they had all the spring together and now all the fall camp together, one unit getting all the reps together. So I think that'll be good for them. That's always going to be, at least in the short term, that'll be the biggest question mark for the Cougars is the offensive line. They're just in this is probably the third class they're in the middle of now for the actually recruiting with the Big 12 behind their back. And so, as most people know, the offensive line is the last one to come along when you can start landing some big offensive linemen, which they've done a good job of in the 25 class. But again, that's going to take a little time for it to come to fruition, like you mentioned earlier. It may not be year one, but man, I'll tell you what, this staff is pretty much giving everybody whiplash from the last staff to this one with the way they run things, the way that they demand every little thing be done the right way, all the small things be done the right way. So when it comes game time, it's just football. You're in so much of a pattern of just doing every little thing. You hear these things like run on and off the field. You know what I mean? Sprint on and off the field and 100% effort every play. And if you're in a rep in a drill, your helmet's on, your chin strap, you got your mouthpiece, and you hear coach constantly. He carries around a microphone connected to the speaker system, and constantly is just, reiterating the same thing about every little thing you need to do the right way and 100% effort. And so the team's embraced it, and I think there's a lot of people really starting to get behind the culture they're building over there. And so I think they're in a good spot. I mean, a lot of the things are pretty much settled. I know they'll still have some battles going down the stretch, maybe just depth chart, maybe who's ready and who's not to get in-game reps. But for the most part, it feels like there hasn't been any major position battles that have come up that have become like a really must-watch type situation.
Okay. You mentioned the offensive line is a concern on that side of the ball. What's the strength of this Cougar offense?
I would say right now the strength heading into the season will probably be, they've got a really deep cornerback room. They've got a really good wide receiver room. There was a lot of angst after the spring transfer portal came and went. There was some departures, and so there was some concern. Not only the guys that they've, and that's another point to Fritz's staff, the guys they brought in through the transfer portal. I don't think I've seen one that's not been a hit yet in terms of, they got two wide receivers from Tulsa. Both those guys are running with the first and second team wide receiver group, so they're going to get playing time. There's two freshman wide receivers out of Louisiana. Both those guys have come in and they're pushing for reps, and they'll probably play this year as freshmen. It'll be up to the staff if they want to just try to use them on those 4 games or not. But the wide receiver room, it's a great mix of those that are coming back and the new ones that they brought in have really hit well. And then, like I said, the cornerbacks. Latrell McCutcheon set out last year, probably the last guy ever to have to sit a year out after transferring. But he's a guy that initially signed with Oklahoma and then transferred to USC when that transfer happened, when they went out there. And then after a year, he transferred back here to Houston. He is a really good cornerback. He has a shot to be a Big 12, all Big 12 selection. So he'll be one to watch. And opposite of him with the ones, Jalen Emery is a guy that, flirted a bit with the transfer portal, decided to stay, and he has had a phenomenal camp. But really has had a good camp. He's been making plays. His body's a little bit stronger this year. You can tell he's done some work in the offseason, and he's getting better as a corner. And like I said, he's just had a really good camp. So corners and wide receivers.
Okay. What's the strength of the defense, the corners?
I would say the corners, but the linebackers as well. With them switching to a 3-man front, there's probably only going to be 2 linebackers on the field just about all the time because they use that third linebacker. They call it dog position, just an edge guy. And they usually have him up on the line. Depending on setting, it's usually going to be 2. And they've got, again, they brought 2 really good linebackers in via the transfer portal. And they've got some homegrown ones as well that are really good. Matter of fact, Latrell McCutcheon's younger brother, Latravian McCutcheon, is a linebacker on the team, and he's come on a lot. He was really good, showed some flashes his freshman year, but spring and then this camp, he's a playmaker. And I'm interested to see, how quickly he starts pushing those guys. He's been running with the second team, but I'm interested to see how quickly he starts pushing for more snaps up front.
What's the concern on defense?
Probably the concern, I would say just up front, you know what I mean? Switching to that 3-man front, it's weird when you switch from a 4 to a 3. Sometimes that involves different body styles, with a nose versus, your 4-man front tackles. But they've got a couple guys. Zeke Strong is a guy that's been on the team for a while. He was an edge guy, but he fits really better. And you've seen it in camp. He's got a smile on his face. He's climbed the depth chart into the first team, but he fits better with his athleticism and his body style as that hand on the ground end in the three-man front. So he's had a good camp. I could tell that he's enjoying this front better. I asked him the other day if he liked it better, and he said he did. He liked what he got to do as opposed to the 4-man front. He wasn't quite fast enough for the edge, but he wasn't quite big enough. You know what I mean? He wasn't big enough to go inside either. This really fits him well. I'm interested to see what type of year he has. But I would say the biggest concern for them is just how effective can they get with their pass rush up front. It helps having those good corners back there, of course. Gives you maybe an extra second or two for those, rushers to potentially get to the quarterback. But they're going to have to, it's the Big 12 now. You got to prove yourself in the trenches, basically.
Okay. What defines a successful season for Houston in this transition year, and what needs to happen for that to take place?
Yeah, that's been a good conversation this, going back to since Fritz was hired. For me, Vegas, whatever, has them 3, 4, or 5 win team type deal. A few places, you'll start seeing them do bowl projections, and I've seen them pop up on a few of those. To me, a bowl game this first year would be an excellent. Can they overachieve potentially? But, they've got a really tough schedule this year, much tougher than they had last year. And so I think if this team could get to 6 wins, get that bowl game, get that experience for the players, that reward, get those extra practices for the young guys, I think that would be a success this year. And anything on top of that is probably just, extra.
What went wrong with the season if they don't get to a bowl?
I would say the only potential hurdle for them is if they They just got to stay healthy. They have some really good guys up front. They're getting better depth wise. As each recruiting class goes by, and of course that's easier to do with the transfer portal now. They're getting better with depth, but specifically like the offensive line, they really can't afford to have any major injuries up there. They do have better backups. They're better like top two teams than they were a year ago, but nonetheless, I mean, you really can't afford for any major injuries, and really they have to avoid now after suffering two guys that had season-ending injuries in the last week at running back. They were a little further down the depth chart. They weren't in the top three, but now you've lost that two guys for depth-wise, and so it's one of those. I think they got to avoid that bug as well. Pretty much, I know a lot of teams. Everybody pretty much says that I can't afford to have any major injuries, but for a team like Houston that's still building that Big 12 depth, they can't afford it.
Okay, let's back up and talk about the quarterback position. Speaking of injuries, anytime the starter gets hurt, it puts a lot of pressure on the team to perform. What does that quarterback depth look like?
It's actually not too bad. It's interesting you mentioned that. I saw an article the other day here on 247 that was talking about the best quarterback rooms in the country. And, it was one of those I was tagged on. And I was like, how do we get tagged on this? And I knew they had it, So I go down and look, but, they brought in Zion Chris from Louisiana during the offseason. He had a really good freshman year over there, played some for them, and he's very, very dual threat, just a tremendous athlete. He can sling the ball as well. Donovan Smith's the incumbent coming back. He had that job. He had a labrum tear that he had surgery on right after the season. And so he didn't throw any in the spring. He was cleared and started throwing in the summer, and he's been the first team quarterback all it can't. But having Chris back there to either, if something were to happen and he has to come in, you're not coming in with just some freshman or whatever, just some raw guy that's not seen the field yet. But also, as far as having him be able to sit this year behind Donovan and learn this offense really well, really sets him up nicely heading into next year to really compete for that first team quarterback spot. So I think Donovan Smith is going to be much more effective this year. I think the staff will do a way better job of using an offense that plays to his strengths, right. And they're going to include him more in the run game. You'll see him under center some. You'll see him running the ball on, design runs and stuff like that. So they shied away from that a lot with the previous staff, and I don't think they're going to do that with him. I know it opens you up for some hits or whatever potential injury there, but I mean, he's a huge human being and he moves really fast. So why not use that to your advantage when it helps?
I agree. Okay, so every schedule seems to have that game that makes the difference between possibly winning a whole bunch more or losing a whole bunch more. Is there a linchpin game on this schedule for Houston?
I really think, and it sounds cheesy a bit, but they open with UNLV at home. In that second week game, they go to Oklahoma, and so I think it's one of the. It's a tough ask, obviously heading up there, but I don't know if that one is per se going to define the season. But I think if they can go up there and for sure at least look respectable, maybe put a scare in them, stick with them through the first half. I wouldn't pick Houston to win that game, but God forbid they go up there on the road and Oklahoma's not quite the Oklahoma has been, in the past, but they're still a very talented football team. Let's not act like they don't have players. So, but I think if they could go up there and for sure look respectable and maybe even pull off an upset or something crazy, that game is at least going to define who they are and how well they'll stand up to the rest of the Big 12. I feel like by far Oklahoma's not going to be the best team in the SEC this year, but I think if you can go up there and put up a great fight, maybe even pull off an upset, then I think that's something that really could catapult you actually to more wins further from there. That would do wonders for this team's for their confidence. So that's an important one. But other than that, I think going up to TCU as far as conference play at TCU is going to be a good one that's going to kind of that's a team that they've compared themselves long term versus short term to. Since TCU also took a similar path to get to the Big 12 way back when. So that's one a lot of fans, I think, would like to be able to go on the road. Holgerson's up there. That'll be one of those quiet little backstories that's going on that week. So it'll be fun.
Well, I feel bad for the Red Bull dealer in the Houston area. Sales are down. But I'm sure the football wins will be up. Give me your record prediction for this season for the Houston Cougars.
I would say I would say I think they'll get that six wins. I really do. I think they'll get bowl eligible. I I think it's a big ask to get to six, but I think they'll pull it off. I really do. I think they'll get to the 6 wins and get that bowl game in. Even a lower level Big 12 bowl game is tremendous compared to the bowl games that used to be tied into the AAC. I mean, it's just the payouts better, the locations are generally better, you get a better opponent. So even if it's like the Liberty Bowl, something to that effect, that tie-in that they get at the lower part of the tie-ins, then I think they would be thrilled to do that. So I say they're a 6-win team this year.
Fantastic. Never write off Willie Fritz. If he goes 6-6 this year, Rob, with what he inherited and having to put the pieces together, I'm afraid what he's going to be in year 3 and 4.
Yeah, and they're doing a great job in recruiting, and they won't come really into play a lot until the next couple of years. But not only have they put together a really solid 25 class, they've already got a commitment from a kid here in the Houston area, Keyshawn Henderson, who's rated the #1 athlete in the country for the 26 class. They're allowing him to play quarterback. A few schools prefer him at receiver, but they've told him, look, if you want to play quarterback, you come here, we're going to let you. And here's a good one for you. Do you want to know who his high school head coach is? Michael Bishop.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
what goes around.
You know, that Fritz and Bishop relationship probably is not hurting those efforts there. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out in the long term.
Very good. That's it for your Houston Cougars fall camp report from Rob Sellers. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Tim.